get us kicked off. Hello there, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Future of Headless: Insights from WP Engine's 2024 Research Study. My name's Paige, and I will be the host for today's webinar. Very excited to be here and get you introduced to our brilliant speakers who will get you further acquainted with the headless approach and the extensive research that we've done over the past year or so. Before we start the webinar today, I'll start off by just introducing a few housekeeping items. First, a quick reminder that we are recording this webinar. Within about 24 hours, we'll share it with all the registrants via email, along with the presentation, which will include a bunch of different links that you'll be able to reference afterwards. Secondly, the chat feature has been disabled for today's webinar. However, we do encourage you to send in your questions for our headless experts via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. While we likely won't be able to get to all of your questions, please don't hesitate to ask them throughout, and we will try to cover as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Finally, in just a moment, you'll see a polling question pop up on your screen. We would love to see where everyone is joining from today. So let us know. Oh, already a few Europes. I feel like it's pretty, well, I guess it's about evening time in Europe at this point. Looking good. Awesome. Let's see. Yeah, majority here joining from North America. Not surprising. Definitely conducive to that time. But yeah, we're seeing a nice spread. So thank you all for sharing, and we love to see such a diverse audience with us today, and we really just can't wait to kick off the presentation. So without further ado, I am going to pass it over to our first presenter today, Alex Moon. Alex, you take it away.
Hey everyone, so we're talking about headless WordPress. So I guess my job here today is to tell you all about headless WordPress. And we're going to start with you can just kind of start clicking through these page. We're going to start with what is headless WordPress. And then we're going to talk about why you might want to choose WordPress and why you might want to choose headless. Because the reality is, if you're choosing headless WordPress, you're really choosing those two things as a kind of separate entities. So let's jump into what is headless WordPress. As a quick review, you all probably know this, but so we're all on the same page. This is kind of our traditional architecture for a WordPress website, right? And my focus here is going to be on these three characters: our developer, our publisher, and our visitor. So our developer and our publisher are both working in their respective fields and putting inputs into WordPress. On the developer side, that's code, JavaScript, CSS, HTML, PHP, and the publisher is creating media, videos, images, and whatever other content, creating layouts and designs, etc. WordPress, grinds its gears, does its thing, and publishes those sites, pages, etc., out through a CDN that distributes them to our visitor. We're going to keep these three characters, but we're going to look at this from a headless way now. So the headless approach, there's a lot more going on here, but I want to draw your attention to a couple of specific things. First, we'll start with the publisher. We notice the publisher is still talking to WordPress, right? Their job hasn't changed. The same user interface, same experience that they're familiar with. Similar with our visitor, they're still talking to a CDN, still browsing your site in the same way. All of our big changes are in how the developer works. And that's going to be the theme of a lot of what I'm talking about, is that when we talk about a headless approach, we're really talking about a fundamental shift in how the developer's job works. So let's talk about how the developer's job changes. We're going to start with the API in the center there, right? 9 times out of 10 here at WP Engine, we're going to recommend a GraphQL API based on WP GraphQL. We've spent a lot of time investing in that and building our products around that. That said, the WPA REST API is also an option for building headless sites and such. But that's really the core of what headless is that API. What's on the other end of that API, if you're really daring, could be a C++ app. In the realm of maybe possibility, more likely, maybe you're building something in Laravel, or most likely you're probably building something in JavaScript. And that is what we at WP Engine build a lot of our tooling in, is we recognize that a lot of our customers and a lot of folks out there, they want, for whatever reason that we'll get into here, they want a different experience for their developers. And that new experience is using JavaScript frameworks, whether that's React, Vue, Svelte, etc., to build out web experiences. And that is really core to what's happening here, right? When you choose headless, you're choosing to build primarily in JavaScript, not primarily in WordPress and PHP, though those developers often still write some WordPress and PHP related code to modify the backend to work with their front end needs. So yeah, that's WordPress at WP Engine, or headless WordPress at WP Engine. Our platform is running that JavaScript framework and delivering that out to your customers on our platform. So let's talk about why you would choose this kind of approach. So why headless, or why WordPress? Sorry. When we're talking about headless WordPress, ultimately, we're still choosing WordPress. So headless WordPress doesn't really magically fix anything that you might think is broken in WordPress, and it doesn't magically break anything in WordPress. It's just a fundamentally different approach, and we're still fundamentally dealing with WordPress. So what is WordPress good at? Why do you already choose WordPress for your projects, right? Is it because it's the world's best editorial CMS? Is it because your client asked you to use WordPress and you've actually never used it before and you're not sure why they love it, but they're asking you to use it, right? Is it because WordPress is open source and highly flexible and you can do what you want with it? There's any number of reasons why you might choose WordPress, and all those are good reasons to choose headless WordPress. But on the flip side of that, right? Like, doing a headless site doesn't magically make WordPress a great database builder, right? It's good for publishing content, and it's still going to be publishing content. It's not going to magically run your SaaS app because we're going headless. So if WordPress is good for your project, headless WordPress is probably going to be good for your project. But why would we go headless? So let's dive into why headless here. Ultimately, the short answer is because you need it. Right? Again, headless doesn't magically fix or break WordPress. This is an option you choose. And now we're going to dive into why you would choose that, right? Here at WP Engine, we don't care whether you go headless or not. What we care, we're here to serve and help you deliver WordPress sites, whether headless or not, across our platform. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide page. Let's talk about headless. So headless kind of exists on a spectrum. There's a lot of things it provides, and there's one core requirement here in the center, and that is the technology and developer experience. All right, this goes back to that slide showing the headless architecture. It fundamentally changed how the developer worked. If you can, it's a core requirement in two senses. One sense, if you can't accept this, right? If your developers don't want to accept it, if your business doesn't want to accept the fact that we're now working in JavaScript frameworks, then headless WordPress isn't for you. On the other side of that, if your developers and your business are like, no, we have to be working over here, then none of these other requirements really matter. This is both enough to qualify and disqualify you. But there are other benefits. So let's look at the left side of this chart, the headless benefit seekers. we get a lot of folks coming to us that say, hey, I heard headless can do performance, security, scalability, right? And should I do headless? Here's the thing about WP Engine. Performance, security, and scalability are core to our products, whether or not you're building on headless, right? This is what we want our platform to deliver to you, whether or not you're using Node and JavaScript to build out your front ends. So if you're not ready to accept the technology change, then no, you do not need headless to achieve the performance, security, and scalability for your site. Whether it's a dedicated server, whether it's any of our other products like NitroPack that we just acquired, or any other diagnostics tools to help you find performance bottlenecks that we can provide. All these other products can help drive your traditional WordPress setup to be more performance, secure, and stable. About the one thing we can't technically do for you is actually rewrite code. That said, we've got a bunch of agency partners that I'm sure someone would love to point you to that could help you with that. So, but these are still benefits of headless. And if you're ready to accept that technology change, then headless is a great option. So let's talk about the right side of this chart now, the advanced headless things. So these are really core features of headless that a lot of people, whether they're not choosing headless WordPress, they're choosing headless because of these things. So category one here, composability and custom website experience. This is a pretty vague category. We'll get into it a little bit on one of the other points. But whether or not it's UX experience, whether it's specific like internationalization or localization features, whether it's like A/B testing, a lot of that is possible on WordPress. Some of it is a lot easier on JavaScript frameworks, just because of how they're fundamentally designed. And so a lot of developers who need these tools and need this kind of customizability really reach for headless WordPress because they find it much easier to accomplish their goals on a headless architecture. Next slide. Number two, omnichannel is, no, we're good here, Pam. Is really the core of what headless provides. For those who aren't familiar with the term omnichannel, this is referring to the idea of you have one source of truth that can publish to multiple locations. Maybe that's a mobile app and a website. Maybe that's a couple different websites. Maybe it's some kind of digital signage experience. Instead of publishing a piece of content and then having to update it in 3 different locations or publish it in 3 different locations, you can publish it once out to all of your channels, wherever those are. And this is really a strong benefit for headless. I heard back a long time ago, a really great example of this. They weren't even driving websites with their headless CMS. They were driving an auditory experience for a museum. And instead of recording that auditory experience, and when they decided to change it, having to do a whole long re-recording process, they're using a high quality text to speech on little handheld devices. And the second they wanted to make an edit or an update in that auditory tour for their visitors, they could easily make a change, and the headless site or their headless CMS drove those updates out to all those devices almost instantaneously. So whatever your channels are, headless is a really great option for that. And our final section, multi-CMS. This term is a little bit misleading because it's not necessarily CMSs, but it's really the opposite of omnichannel, right? So whereas omnichannel is we have one source of truth to many locations, multi-CMS speaks to having many sources of truth, all driving one experience. A really great and common example of this would be using something like, let's say, Shopify to drive an e-commerce experience. And on the exact same website, though, you also have various marketing pages and a blog that you run. And WordPress can drive that. So you have 2 unique sets of data in their own tools that are really great at doing what they do. And you pull all that unique data into a single website or mobile app, and mobile app if you wanted, combine omnichannel with multi-CMS and get all that data into one location and one experience for your users. So whether or not you need all this complicated advanced headless tooling or you're just looking for performance security and scalability, if you want the technology, then that you might want headless. Um, yeah, I think that's about it. Jason, did I miss anything, or are you going to take it from here?
I can take it here from here, and well said. I think there's, I often get asked, especially by folks that have been in the WordPress community for a long time, why would I want to go headless? I can do all these different things in WordPress. I can get speed and security and stability. I know how to do that, and of course, you can do that in any architecture. You could also not have that in any architecture if you don't put things together correctly, right?
Correct.
Um, the big thing is that you want to work in JavaScript, maybe for developer preference, or you want one of those other abilities that headless makes easier for you.
Yep.
Um, and when that is interesting to you and that's something you want to do, headless is a really good option. Um, I also get asked, do I have to go all headless? No, you don't. You can do hybrid. You could have some things, traditionally architected, and you can have some things be headless. In fact, WPEngine.com itself is a hybrid application where some of it is powered by our headless solution and some of it is WordPress just rendering the pages out. So it doesn't need to be an all or nothing, but you have to be interested in JavaScript development, and I would say some of those other benefits that you can get from going headless. All right.
Cool. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah. All right. Why don't we get into it? So that was sort of my preamble into the State of Headless report here. I'm Jason Conan. I'm a director of product for our headless platform here at WP Engine. And hopefully some of you I know and have talked to, and some of you are new to this. Excited to have you all here and to sort of hear about where we think the market is going. And we have a lot of research showing where the market is going here. So the State of Headless isn't just through the lens of WordPress. It's an industry-wide report, just looking at the state of development across the board. And I'll try and sprinkle in, some of my thoughts about how does this relate back to WordPress. Next slide, please. All right. So we conducted the survey in July of 2024 and had over 1,000 IT and marketing professionals participate. So large companies, small companies, a variety of job titles, and around the world to try and get a nice view of what is going on in the development market today and how people are approaching building these digital experience, building these websites. Next slide. And so we came up with 5 key findings out of this research. And what we're seeing is the use of this headless architecture has reached a critical mass across many different industries and company sizes. So across the board, businesses are adopting headless. You might say, oh, but in WordPress, it's a little different. Well, yes, it might be a little bit different, but broadly speaking, where the web development industry is going is in this direction. Second, we're seeing the vast majority of these businesses using headless view it as integral to their success for a variety of the benefits that Alex talked about, being able to go omnichannel, being able to be composable, having very highly customized digital experiences for your customer, attracting, development talent that wants to work in JavaScript. We're also seeing headless increasingly relied on for strategic integrations and innovation. Headless architecture allows you to more easily bring together these different systems to provide a single experience. So that multi-CMS or composable that we're talking about, how do you use the best tool for the job and bring that experience to your customers? So we say WordPress is the best editorial CMS in the world, and we see it remain that. very, very powerful CMS. Why wouldn't you want to use that for editorial, you know, work? But there might be another system that you want to use for e-commerce. There might be another system you might want to do for live events and tracking, maybe calendars or events or things like that. How do you bring those systems together and provide a great digital experience? And so there are hurdles, right? Let's not try and sugarcoat it. There are hurdles. There's investment needed, especially with traditional WordPress developers having to learn new things, having to grow, having to adopt new technologies. So there are growing budgets here that support this. We're seeing more and more money being funneled towards this direction. And the marketing leaders themselves are driving the headless adoption and integration. So next slide. So let's talk about the key findings that use of headless architecture has reached critical mass. So we've seen it proven as a modern web architecture that allows for rapid scalability and allows for those seamless integrations. It is the new industry standard across the overall web development industry. And this rise is a testament of the compelling advantages it offers, the performance, faster time to innovation, the omni-channel experiences at scale. So if you look at this adoption as it's marching through time, in 2019, 53%, in 2024, 73%. So of all the businesses surveyed, 73 are already using a headless architecture. That's a 14% increase from 2021 and a 40% increase from 2019. Respondents in the UK are significantly more likely to use headless architecture than those in Australia and the US. And so, these adoptions show marketers, developers are finding value in the benefits of architecting this way. Next slide, please. When we look across the types of industry, we see sales, media, and marketing leading the charge here in adopting, followed by HR, legal, finance, and others. 82% adoption rate. And I don't think it's an accident that media and marketing are up there, because media and marketing, these sites have high content creation needs. They have high dynamic needs. They have high scalability needs and integration needs and all of these things. And a lot of times there are omni-channel experiences that are associated with these. So multiple different websites, multiple different apps or kiosks or billboards or things like that that can be powered by that same headless architecture. These other industries are not far behind as far as what is interesting in the headless. So to give you an idea, there's more nuanced headless adoption where there are the traditionally tech forward sectors, right? And so you're seeing people that are out there trying to adopt new technologies, trying to get a leg up, and then you're seeing the other industries sort of following because they're seeing success there. Next slide. So we want to hear from you. What's your experience with the headless approach?
Just letting some answers flow in right now. We're seeing lots of people here to learn, but certainly certainly a nice mix between currently using a headless approach and considering. So I'll give it about one more second here. All right.
So we have some folks using, we have considering, exploring, learning, and everybody here is interested in something about headless. So we have nobody dissenting on that. So hopefully we're giving you some content that will help with this. And I do encourage you to download and read the full report. All right, let's go on to the next slide here. So, similar to the results we found in the report, and not really surprising, we're seeing that some of you are using or interested or considering. broadly speaking, in 2024, 73% of those surveys have adopted and 24% haven't. Or I'm sorry, 27% of those have not. Of that 27%, 98 are either evaluating or planning to evaluate. 98% planning or currently evaluating. That's huge, right? It's telling me that there is something here, that it is real, that these trends are sort of taking over how folks build websites. And that is up year over year over year. So in 2021, I believe it was in the high 70s we're considering. Now it's 98%. All right, next slide, please. All right. So that next key finding is the vast majority of businesses using headless view it as integral to their success. And we're seeing it proven as a modern web architecture that enables that rapid scalability and integrations. It's quite compelling to the marketers to provide those very unique, personalized digital experiences to their customers. Go to the next slide here. So what we're finding is over 4 in 5 respondents agree that it's easier to deliver a consistent experience. Why would that be? Well, you're separating out your content and your content creation from the display and experience that you're giving to your customers, so that you can more easily control and reuse those experiences across multiple channels, where you're keeping the content creation in your CMS, and WordPress being the best editorial CMS, consistent. And that leads right into the next one: reuse content across multiple digital channels. Wouldn't it be great if you only needed to write it once and it can be used in multiple places, right? And headless allows for that to be easier. I've talked to WordPress developers that sort of use the multiple WordPress instances to power different sites, and use the concept of multi-site. And actually, it's a lot easier to do that headlessly. So you say, all right, I just have one WordPress instance and I have everybody in there, and I can go and query that content, look at some tags or custom fields that you've created, and send that content to the different experiences that I need it without having to rely on multi-site. And you don't need a developer. Once it's set up, you don't need a developer to go and get that content out to these different experiences. I've talked to agencies where they have somebody creating content, and it's going out to the website through WordPress, but then they also need that in a kiosk in a museum, that same content, and they have to put that in an email and email it over to somebody in IT to go and upload that. You don't need to do that when it's headless. So let's go to the next slide, please. And probably more importantly, it does say to a lot of folks that there's a competitive advantage here. You're now having a different experience than your competitors. And so, 4 out of 5, so 80% of the respondents believe that. 4 out of 5 believe that's important to the company's success. So if you're ahead of your competition in providing a very unique, personalized, omni-channel digital experience, you're going to see a higher conversion rate than your competitors. So it's not just speed and performance and things like that. I think we over-index on speed and performance and security as an industry. Those to me are table stakes. And as Alex mentioned, that's the promise of WP Engine. Any architecture you pick, that's what we're providing. Going headless gives you that additional capabilities, those additional layers of capabilities that can give you that competitive advantage. Next slide, please. Greater ability to scale. So 79% of organizations already using headless rate their ability to scale as good, compared to 62 that have yet to adopt headless. So they see fewer service requests due to the separation of data from the presentation layers in the headless configurations. You do get faster load times and more improved speed performance, which is important, right? Now you have to construct your content in a way, your queries in a way that are cacheable. And we have many folks that help with that on a regular basis. And it allows you to scale. So rather than relying on just WordPress and the WordPress database itself to try and scale, you separate those concerns out. So 90% of businesses that have adopted headless say their company is effective at managing organizational change compared to 76% of the business that have not made the switch. So you're able to say, hey, I have the separation of concerns. I have the folks that know how to work with WordPress and do their content creation in the world's best CMS. And I have developers that know how to build websites using JavaScript and React and various other frameworks. And I have those separations of concerns. I can change the organization if I need to and still have those capabilities. All right, next slide. The next key finding here. When headless is increasingly relied on for strategic and integrations and innovations. So let's move on here to the next slide. So, benefits of the headless architecture. So we're saying that time benefits and creating efficiency, about 30% benefit, customer experience 49, competitive 70. But you get into that big benefit here, enhanced tech and innovation benefits, and that's what we're keying in on here. So, that omni-channel enablement becomes easier. AI integrations become easier. Front-end integrations become easier. You do have better security with WordPress because your WordPress is no longer the front door to your website. You do have greater extensibility of API support. You're able to improve your DevOps velocity by adopting modern CI/CD practices. And then you're able to do that high content creation because you have less load on WordPress itself. The folks using WordPress can focus on the content, not the also the powering of the website. That's taken care of over in the front end. All right, next slide, please. So this is talking about a lot of the technology integrations with a headless architecture. So analytics software, security software, e-commerce, CRM, WordPress, monitoring, reporting, mobile, etc. There's all of these different areas that you can explore that are more difficult when just using WordPress traditionally standalone if you do a hybrid headless or a headless build on that. Paige, I believe you have, you did share that. So there's a link to share in here. All right, next slide, please. So what are the barriers? There are organizational hurdles, there are budget constraints, and point to technological challenges, barriers while adopting technology. And so you can see this sort of broken out by different regions, right? So let's talk about the organizational barriers. If you are a traditional WordPress agency or developer, you likely are working with customers that know how to work with WordPress, you know how to build with WordPress, you don't necessarily have JavaScript developers on hand, or you might not know JavaScript development or things like that. So there's some organizational challenges to overcome. And as Alex mentioned earlier, that's sort of the prerequisite. You have to want that technology. You have to want to work that way. If you don't want to work that way, headless is not necessarily for you, at least at this time. There are some budget constraints, right? So it's a little bit more expensive to build these types of sites initially. And what we've seen with some of our agency partners who have adopted that, there's that first build that's a little bit more expensive because there's a learning curve, because you have to develop things. But then subsequent builds do become cheaper, especially as you're reusing components. And I touched on the tech barriers here. You have to want to work with JavaScript. You have to see enough value in some of the other capabilities to want to work that way. All right, next key finding. All right, growing budgets and agency support signaled continued investment in these headless solutions. So it's still something that we're hearing. It's still something that we believe is growing. I've watched the headless market grow year over year. And indeed, I've watched the headless WordPress market itself grow year over year at a clip of about 25% year over year. So this market is growing and it's continuing to grow. Next slide. So majority of respondents are working with an external agency to bring these experiences to life. So that's great for agencies that are looking to dive into this market, that are working to provide these capabilities, omni-channel experiences and integrations and all of the good stuff that Headless brings to their customers. There's a demand for it, right? 17% are planning. So the vast majority are, this is agency led. I think that's really encouraging. Because there is that learning curve, you would hire somebody to help you with this. You would hire experts to work through these things with you as you grow and mature. Next slide, please. So again, just sort of reiterating that agency collaboration is the catalyst. And we've seen that with our agency partners and widely across the web industry itself, outside of WordPress as well. Next slide, please. So what we're seeing here is what are you expecting to see as an impact for going headless? So 60% of respondents believe their organization's website infrastructure budget will increase over the next 12 months, with 32% expecting a 1% to 9% increase and 24% expecting a 10 to 19% increase. Respondents in the US are the most optimistic with this, 63% expecting a budget increase, followed by the UK and Australia. And 16% of respondents expect a 26 to 35 impact on bottom line financials following a headless integration. So there's money here, right? And money speaks. There's value in that, aside from the other capabilities that you get as well. Next slide, please. We're also seeing that marketing leaders are driving headless integrations. So next slide. So who's deciding this? 75% of CMOs report using a headless technology approach to their websites versus the CTOs. Why would that be? Well, the CMO is seeing value in this. The CMO understands there's value in using the right tools for the right job, the right capabilities to deliver unique experiences, right? Not to anyways diminish the CTO's expectations or partnership in this as well. But the CMO is looking to drive demand, provide experiences, ultimately change, increase conversion rates, right? And they're seeing that using headless helps them increase those. So they are driving the change here. Next slide, please. So, what we're seeing is overwhelmingly agreeing that headless effectively delivers a consistent content experience across, CMOs, both strongly agree, somewhat agree, and agree, and CTOs as well as agree, strongly agree, and somewhat agree. Next slide, please. Where are the challenge areas that they're trying to solve with headless technology? This customer personalization, prospect personalization, updating the websites quickly, adapting to change, the security, and the omni-channel delivery. These are all high concerns for the CMO. So if you show that headless helps with these, the CMO is very, very, very interested in this. Go to the next slide, please. So I just want to give a real practical example here. So Central Square is an example of an organization that used a headless approach with our headless platform and relaunched their site. And this new decoupled site allowed the internal teams to improve their workflow, to manage content more efficiently while providing significant performance improvements. The new site has seen speed and other performance indicators improve across the board while reducing their overall operating expenses. Relaunching also provided their ability to define, design, and deploy their own discrete user journeys for its different target audiences, with improved messaging and improved lead generation. So they're able to personalize this in a way that improved their overall conversion rate. Another alignment to the report on this one, Central Square approached one of our agency partners, WPromote. Thank you, WPromote, for helping empower these internal stakeholders without sacrificing the website performance. So I find that really encouraging. That they saw value. They saw value beyond just speeds and feeds. They saw conversion rates increase. That's really, really important when considering going headless, to look at examples like these, especially as WordPress is still growing into headless. Next slide, please. So just a few more points of inspiration to check out. And when we share this presentation, I'll be able to click in these. But there are other organizations like yours that have used a headless approach to deliver dynamic content across multiple platforms, across multiple channels, streamline their experiences and grow their business. So there's some really, really great examples that we can share with you as well. So with that, I believe we're going to talk through some audience Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. That was wonderful. And Alex, thank you so much as well. I always feel like I learn so much from all of you, but I also just think it's huge to go through these results. I mean, the report is hefty. There's a lot in there, and this was a really great opportunity to highlight some of those key findings and really what we found through the research. So we've had quite a few questions come in throughout. I know Alex and Luis have been able to answer a few more, more publicly, just in the Q&A there. But one question that I am curious about is, I guess, what would for either of you, Jason or Alex, what if you were in a position where you are excited about headless and you want to move forward with it? How do you go about getting that, getting the buy-in from the rest of your team? So that's one thing, and I've kind of seen some questions around that. How do you get the buy-in? What's the value behind all of this? So yeah, I would like to know your thoughts on that.
Alex, you wanna start us off here? I've been talking for a while. Give you a
Yeah.
chance.
So I think there's two different scenarios here, kind of where you might need to get buy-in from someone else. One, customer comes in and says, "Hey, I love your work. I need you to build me this WordPress site." And you're not a WordPress developer, right? You're working whatever JavaScript front ends. You're not used to WordPress. And so the buy-in you're looking for is like, "Hey, I can do this work, but for my team to do this, we have to do it headless," right? My expertise is JavaScript frameworks, whether, let's say, it's React and Next, and that's what we build in. If you want a WordPress site, it's got to be headless, right? So you're going back to your customer and getting their buy-in. The other scenario is you're a developer, a team, CTO, whatever, and you're like, "Hey, we need all this, we need an app. We got that in our future. We've got multiple sources of data. We're trying to merge all into one site." Um, and you're on that team trying to say, "Hey, let's move from just doing a traditional setup to doing a headless setup." Conversation's a little bit different in each case. I think in the latter case, it's really about, do we have the expertise? Do we have that technical buy-in from our developers who are going to be doing this work, that to make the transition to a new technology and do that advanced side of that chart I was showing, do those strong feature benefits really drive us towards this and what our business needs? If you're the former person, right, you're an agency and someone's come to you wanting a WordPress site, and you're like, "I can do headless WordPress, but I can't just do traditional WordPress." I think that's just doubling down. I know that is not my experience as much. So it's harder for me to speak to that one. Jason, do you have anything on that kind of agency side in that context?
Sorry, I was kind of thinking about how I wanted to respond to the original question. So what you're saying, like, you are a WordPress agency. How would you approach convincing somebody to go headless?
Saying if you're not a WordPress agency, right? Your customer
Right.
comes to you and says, "Hey, I need WordPress. I like your work," and you're like, "I do JavaScript frameworks, right? I do Next and React." Um, and they're not sure about this headless thing, right? Because that's the only way you're going to land this job is if they want you to do it headless.
Mhm.
Is there a path there for them?
I think there's a path there, and it kind of gets back to talking about the value prop of going headless. So you've already determined that you're going to work um, in JavaScript, right? So you're sort of by definition going to go with a headless approach. Um, but the customer you have being in WordPress, they likely know WordPress. They don't have to retrain their people on how to edit content and things like that, and there's power there. And so what you need to do to win that is talk about the values of headless beyond just a WordPress site. So are they going to go omni-channel? Are they going to highly personalize the site? Are they going to have a highly dynamic experience? Are they interested in composable? Are those additional capabilities something that resonate with the customer? If not, then just going headless for headless sake is not correct, and you would be doing the customer a disservice by going that direction. Um, but if any one of those things resonates, then there's a value there. Say, hey, go this way. There's something new that you can do, and get back to what I mentioned earlier about getting a competitive advantage by providing those extra experiences. If that resonates, then you'll have a higher chance of winning that deal.
Muted. There we go. I love that. Thank you so much. So let's dive into a few of these questions that we've received. I think one of the good ones, I guess, and it kind of leans off of this as well. Can you briefly list, 3 pros and cons of headless WordPress in your opinion, each of you?
Sure, sure. So pro, um, you can use sort of the latest and greatest modern web development technologies, the JavaScript technologies. And why is that a pro? Is because a lot of the folks learning how to do web development today, that's how they're learning. Those are the boot camps they're going. So if you're hiring people, you're going to see a population of those devs more so than traditional PHP devs as time marches forward. I think that is certainly a pro. Another pro, I believe wholeheartedly, is the composability of headless, and the flexibility it gives you to integrate with different systems and go omni-channel. Um, and I do believe that the third pro, beyond that, is the dynamic experiences that you can create, the bespoke experiences that you can create for your customers or for your own brand. Some of the cons. Well, there's the flip side of that. If you're not a JavaScript developer and you're not interested in it, then it's really hard, right? It's not something that you necessarily want to do. And so, it's two sides of that coin, right? Um, and then you do have a learning curve, and you do have more technology decisions to make than you might have with a traditional WordPress build. And so those pros need to outweigh the cons. And if they outweigh the cons, then you should look at headless. And if they don't, you should do what you're still doing.
That brings up a good point and kind of leads into the question, which I think, from your side, Alex, as a developer, what's the benefit if you're a WordPress developer for a headless approach?
Um, Specifically, if you're WordPress developer, maybe not a lot. Again, like if you don't want to and not interested in learning modern JavaScript frameworks, maybe you're not interested. And that's okay. That's build how you know to build best, right? And give your customers or whoever you're building for what they want. Um, That said, I think there's some really interesting technical use cases that WordPress will just never be able to touch because it's fundamentally PHP rendered on a server, right? It's fundamentally server-side rendering. And in spaces like e-commerce, where every millisecond counts, right? There's a famous Amazon article that we all read 10 years ago that was talking about how many millions of dollars they lost for every second, or millisecond of delay on page loads. And that's where things like static site generators, and highly cacheable content really plays in strong. And that's a use case that we can cache it, we can get better caching methods, and that can all help. But if you really need to keep pushing those limits, some kind of static site generator might be your best option. And but instead of ditching all these years of work you've put into WordPress, by simply flipping your front, not simply, but by moving to headless, you can start leveraging these technologies where you can go, cool, all my ecom data, I'm going to render statically. All my blog content, doesn't need to be fully static, but I can highly cache it because it doesn't change that often, right? You can tweak, hey, I'm going to use SSR on these pages. I'm going to use static site generation on these pages. I can tweak how long that static content is being cached or that server-side rendered content is being cached. And I can really tweak like page by page or even like component by component level data and how that's cached and how that's rendered out to my users and really optimize that performance. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just to sort of add to that, I'm a big fan of using the right tool for the right job. And sometimes the tool that is the right tool is the tool that you know, right?
Yep.
And that's okay. But sometimes it's a new tool. And so using that when the situation applies might be the right thing, And I go back to, you want to be interested in JavaScript? Awesome, cool. You can go do that. You want omni-channel or this ease of use? Go hybrid. Go do a partial build in headless
Yep.
and dip into it. I think there's a lot of growth opportunities for a lot of folks.
Yep.
And when I look at the report as a whole, and I see the web development industry, those providing these digital experiences, overwhelmingly heading towards headless. I want WordPress to be a part of that, right? Doesn't need to be all headless all the time, but I want WordPress to have the optionality to be a part of that. And that's what we're trying to illustrate here.
I love that. Thank you so much. We've got a couple minutes left, so maybe one or two more questions. Jason, this might be a good one for you. Which industry is demanding more of this headless technology, and why do you think it is that way?
Yeah, definitely. So broadly speaking, I see a lot of demand in media and news. And so, I can go into specific verticals, breaking news, world news, politics, sports, technological news, and things like that. And why? Because sometimes they're syndicating content out to multiple sources. So that omni-channel experience. But there's also this highly competitive nature of media to have that content be created rapidly and get it around the world as rapid as possible and be consumed as rapid as possible, because the first movers in that space are going to get the highest conversion rates. They're going to get the eyes on their content. They're going to get the traffic, and that's going to lead to whatever payment mechanism they happen to be employing on their site. Is that an ad network? Is that subscriptions or things like that? So getting that content out there fast, getting it to multiple locations, and having it be highly personalized, that's where I see a huge benefit. A close second in my mind is e-commerce. For all the reasons that Alex talked about, use the best tool for the job. There are a lot of great e-commerce tools out there. Storefront managers and things like that, but you also have editorial content. Combine those two things together and you have a really powerful site, rather than trying to do everything with a tool that's okay at one thing but really great at another thing.
That's a great point. I love that. Let's see. Alex, I think you mentioned you would be willing to answer this one live. Which industry is, or no, wrong one, sorry. What impact does headless have on existing WordPress plugins?
Yeah, this is a really great question, and like it's like usually one of the first questions we get when people are like, "All right, I'm interested in this. How does this work?" Uh, there's a lot of things changing in this space with Gutenberg and full site editing, but the generalization I'll make is if it modifies the HTML and the visualization that gets delivered to your customers, it's probably not applicable. There's some exceptions to that. SEO is a really good exception. Most SEO plugins, like they generate all this data, whether it's you putting them or they automate it for you, and they will inject that into the head of your WordPress site pages. It's obviously not doing that for us anymore, but it's all that data that it's storing and generating for us is still really useful. On most of the sites I worked on, I can literally go in there and ask Yoast or ask whatever the SEO tool is and say, hey, give me that data that you would have inserted into the head. It'll give me the block of HTML, and I just have to shove it in on, on my JavaScript framework. It's a fairly simple process. You can get more advanced where you go in and pick out the individual data, but the point is Yoast already has all that data. The one step that needs to happen is we need to integrate that data into WP GraphQL or whatever, or the WordPress REST API. Most plugins these days already expose their data to the REST API. So if you're using that, that's usually pretty easy. And on the GraphQL side, most popular data sourcing plugins have integrations. So ACF has one that's maintained by Jason Ball. Yoast has one that's maintained by someone in the community. There's a lot of others that they're out there. I will add forms because Andy was asking about forms as well to this conversation. Forms are actually a really strong one for use in headless. I've seen a lot of different implementations, right? So I've worked on building like React components that take like the Gravity Forms JSON description of a form and render out the form for you using Gravity Forms CSS, right? And it's very plug and play, just like you would use on WordPress side. Whether it's using a shortcode or something else to get that form on the page, it can vary, Andy. But then on the other side of it, all those form APIs already have REST API endpoints that are waiting for that form to be submitted. Some people choose to use GraphQL to submit that and do some very custom things. My option is I use both REST and GraphQL when it's applicable, right? So in this case, there's already an endpoint waiting for that form to be submitted. I'm just going to use that endpoint. There's no point in rewriting it and using GraphQL when the REST endpoint already is there. So it's a matter of just telling, hey, here's my backend. This is where you submit that data and connecting, wiring up that form component to do that. So all these plugins, it's still possible to use. It's just a different experience wiring them up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we are at time. Thank you so much, Jason and Alex, for an insightful conversation today and sharing all of your knowledge with us. So we really appreciate it. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. We will be following up with that recording and the slide deck shortly. So within the next 24 hours, you'll receive that. If you have any questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out to events@wpengine.com. And we can get those questions answered for you. We did have a lot of questions that came through today. Many were answered individually, but there were some that we weren't able to hit. We'll connect offline and reach out if it is something that we think will be will lead to a great conversation. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful December.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.
So.